What's going on, everyone? My name is Rosendo. Welcome back to my channel, and we are back with another video. And today we are back with another track review, episode number 5. Now we have an episode that I'm very excited for. A lot of things I want to go over in today's video. Track review today. Next video you guys will get will be a breakdown video instead, because my new track, Not Me, Us, is out on all platforms. Definitely check it out. Old school trance with a modern approach. So that's coming next time, but today we have another track review. If my mic is buzzing, I'm sorry. I was able to fix the issues a little bit a few videos ago, and it's not buzzing as bad anymore. So it might buzz a few times in this video, but I think it's not as bad. In any case, I want to get straight to it because I have a lot of things I want to talk about regarding this track. Like I said, a lot of things I'm excited for. So thank you for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe. But without further ado, let's hop into Spotify. All right, we are back at Spotify with the track I chose for this week, Deepest Vales. Now, definitely a lot of things I want to go over in the preface today before we actually review the track, because A, this is an area where I like to talk about kind of the things we look for in this specific installment of the track review, and B, there's something very specific, two things actually, that I want to go over about this track, one of which applies a lot to last track review. If you saw the Jai Wolf Nothing Left to Lose breakdown, which I made a little note in the comments about, one of the things that I absolutely forgot to mention that I will go over here because it's a lot more important here than it was in that video. So why don't we start with that? Thing number one I want to go over is this track in the context, well, actually not in the context of the EP. Now, I mentioned this already in, I think I probably mentioned this kind of casually, but here's the exact method I use on how I choose the track. I look at every Friday, my Spotify release radar gets kind of updated. And on Friday or Sunday, depending on the day, I'll look through my release radar and I'll be like, that's the track I'm going to use for the track. If I know I'm doing a track review this week, I'll say that's the track I'm going to use. So I saw this is actually the first track on my release radar. I happened to have time to go through all the other ones this week. So I went through my release radar and I thought this one I'm going to save for Sunday. And that's exactly what I did. So that's my method of choosing the track is I go through my release radar. I see a track by maybe an artist I haven't reviewed, an artist I like, a genre, anything that kind of sticks out to me. And that is how I chose this track. Now, the problem with that and what ended up happening with the last video and this video is this track is not a standalone track. It is not a standalone single. It is a part of an EP. So we come into this thing, which is the first topic I want to talk about is how do we review tracks as part of EPs individually? Now, I would argue that you shouldn't. I really would argue that you shouldn't. We're going to end up doing that today. But that is a nuance that we need to take into consideration when we review this track, that I will take into consideration when I review this track, that I have already taken into consideration after listening to it the second time. But what happened was earlier today when I was actually going to review this track and I clicked on it, I went to last year's page and I saw it was a part of EP. I thought, oh man, it's a part of an EP. It wouldn't make sense to review individually. I had already chosen the track. I use the same process every time, and that's how I'm going to end up reviewing it. And more to that, it kind of shows one of the things I don't like about how artists sometimes, I don't know if this happened in this case, it's just an example, how artists sometimes release singles that are part of a larger work before the larger work comes out. Now, Spotify kind of might not do the track justice, because if I were just listening to it on my release radar, I would have listened to it without knowing it was a part of a bigger EP, which kind of is one of the downsides of, releasing on a platform, right? That's kind of, it is how it is. Spotify is going to push a track as a part of a release radar. But B, that is one of the things that artists do sometimes, where they release singles that are part of albums before they come out. And I personally don't really like listening to them. If albums are well crafted, you really do want to listen to the tracks in the order of the album, all at once. Sure, it might make sense for some tracks that, hey, you can get away with listening to it outside of the album. And that's something I talked a little bit about in my discography tier list, the 2025 one. And we're kind of getting into the realm of things that I would have to elaborate a lot on. And I already know this is going to be a long video, so I want to try to keep it to a minimum. But the point is this. Tracks that are part of a larger work, I think, should be reviewed in the context of the larger work. That's not what we're going to do today, because of the method of how I choose the track that I end up reviewing. But I did want to mention that today. It would be like if someone rated a track out of my Expression EP. I mean, if you saw the breakdown in my 2025 tier list, I talked about some of the tracks that don't really make sense outside of the context of the EP. Case Chords is one of them. Intro is kind of another one. Betrayal is kind of another one as well. But, for outside the EP, the tracks don't really do as well, standalone, taken individually. So if someone rated one of those tracks without, taking into consideration where they are in the EP and the context of the EP, then, you know, I can see why people might be harsh on them. But I do think tracks should be reviewed that way. And that is something I want to mention before we touch this track, because I mean, we're going to rate it individually. I'm going to take into consideration how it might fit into the EP because I actually haven't listened to the EP. But we are going to end up rating it individually because to some extent that is one of the downfalls of releasing on a platform, on a music streaming service, where it might push a singular track to consumers without them knowing that it's a part of an EP, which is exactly how I would have listened to this track had I not decided to do it for a track review. If I had just gone through my release radar, I would have listened to it individually, which is how, to some extent, you know, the platform wants me to consume it. Maybe the artist, maybe not the artist, but the platform pushes me to consume it that way, and that's how I ended up consuming it. As someone who doesn't really follow, I love Last Heroes, by the way, but I don't follow them. I don't keep up with them too much, so I didn't know that we're dropping an EP. If I did, maybe I would have, you know, saved it for that. But as someone who likes Last Heroes but doesn't really keep up with them, the fact that a track was pushed onto me as a fan of the artist, but as a consumer through Spotify, the fact that it was pushed onto me almost as if it were individual is how I reviewed the track. Now, I know that's a lot of nuances there that I just mentioned, but this is kind of what I kind of value myself in, is taking into consideration every single component. And B, again, these track reviews are a place for me to be nitpicky and talk about, you know, experiences of listening to track, and as I mentioned, every single component. So I will do exactly that. Okay, now that is an important part. I feel like I talked very fast. I always talk fast. Let's actually talk about, you know, the track and Last Heroes and the genre, because we are talking about Deepest Vales by Last Heroes. Let's talk a little bit about Last Heroes. This is thing number 2, a little bit about Last Heroes and the melodic bass genre, which I really like. Now, the reason I'm very excited for this video, as I mentioned first, is because this is actually the first kind of melodic bass track that I've reviewed, and melodic bass is kind of my top genre. I mean, we had drum and bass that I really liked, and actually I'm going to come back to that. You know, an Millennium track, a Jai Wolf track, and a remix that I just kind of stumbled across that I wanted to kind of take in the nuances of that. But I chose Last Heroes for this week's review because I saw, hey, Last Heroes released a track. I like Last Heroes, and I haven't done any melodic bass reviews, which is not only a genre I really like, but a genre I kind of identify with, and a genre that I want my brand to be kind of connected with. So, future bass review today with Last Heroes. As I mentioned, I really like them. There are a lot of Last Heroes tracks I really like. I'm not sure if this is an Ophelia release. I don't see the Ophelia artwork on there. Oh, I see actually right here, Ophelia Records. I love Ophelia Records, probably my favorite record label. So it's actually our first Ophelia review, my favorite record label, and I can't believe it took me this long, but I really hope there are going to be more Ophelia reviews. So again, I'm very familiar with the Ophelia artist, with the Ophelia sound, with the 7-line sound, the melodic bass sound that I really like. So this is a review I'm really excited for because we get to review a melodic bass track, something I feel very at home with. So finally, let's talk about how that might affect my review, because this goes hand in hand with the Guardian Angel. I believe that's episode number 3, the track review, where I talked a little bit about how expectations might skew your perception or skew your reviews of tracks. Now, I mentioned that a little bit in that video. I'm going to mention it a little bit today, hopefully without repeating myself too much. But actually, one of the things I don't think I mentioned, but I mentioned it in text and post because I learned about it later, is one of the things I learned about how humans, and this might just be a theory at the end of the day, how humans intrinsically compare art is that you do need some sort of baseline for you to compare it to. I find this a lot with myself whenever I listen to a genre for the first time. I always really like all the tracks I listen to out of that genre, but once I listen to more and more of that genre, I get more picky with my taste because I kind of got exposed to it. I know what I like and dislike about certain tracks of that genre and the things I like that tracks do in that genre. So one of the hard parts about this review today is that I'm so familiar and comfortable, and I like melodic bass. I've listened to so much of it that I have a lot of things to compare to, and I'm going, at the end of the day, I'm going to be strict. I am very strict about my melodic bass tracks nowadays because I've listened to so many. I've developed my likes and dislikes in the melodic bass genre that I kind of need something a little definitely above average to kind of impress me nowadays because I've listened to so many. There are so many melodic bass songs out there. So in that track review, and in this one, it will also apply. I talked about how what we know about a sound and an artist, and in this case, to some extent, a record label, will affect your perceptions of how you listen to a track. And B, we talked about how you always kind of need to compare whatever you're taking in from an artistic standpoint, whatever you're taking in to previous references to develop your kind of perception of art and to decide if you like it or not. Now, I'm getting very theoretical here, but I don't think I'm getting too philosophical like in episode 2 where we talked about the art versus the artist and things like that. But I mentioned this because I do think it's important. And B, all that is to say is The short summary of everything I just said in the second part is, hey, I like melodic bass. I listen to a lot of it. I have listened to a lot of it. So it usually takes something, we're going to say extraordinary, to impress me nowadays. That is the short summary of everything I just said in this second half. I should add the short summary of everything I said in the first half was, hey, I know this is a part of an EP, but we're just going to rate it individually today. And at the end, I'll take into consideration how it might change if I were considering how it is a part of a larger work. So like I said, I knew this would be a longer video because of a lot of things I wanted to say, but that is about it. We can actually get to the track review, which I listened to twice. And last thing I'll quickly mention, I know I said we would get to it, is this is one of those scenarios where I listened to it the first time and I actually changed my mind a little bit the second time, which is why which is why I clarified that I like listening to things more than once to kind of make my mind. I kind of got a new view and a new perception of it the second time I listened to it in a different setting, and now this will be the third time. So why don't we take a listen to it all together? As a reminder, there will be no sound playing because of copyright reasons, but we can all take a listen to it at the same time. With Deepest Vales by Last Heroes in 3, 2, 1, and we're off. After listening to this track the second time, and my third time listening to it now, I really like this intro. It sets up a story, right? And I've talked about storytelling and the narrative of tracks, and this is one of those scenarios where the intro kind of sets up the scene and the stage for the track to come. So I really like that intro. One of the first thing that I kind of noticed and that I'm hearing again is that you got kind of like a softer kick, not too EDM-y, kind of melodic bassy kick, but something a little bit more rock-like. Into this somewhat more rock-like section, you can hear kind of the guitars and things like that. I like the vocals. Their vocals have really good effects. And we get something a little bit unique for melodic bass right now. Into a pretty standard strip section. Right away, the track feels like it's going by really fast. And I'll mention more about that in the end. But nice vocals here. I'll probably touch on the vocals a little bit immediately after as well. Pretty standard build-up. Nice arp right there. Into a drop. Very nice melodic bass drop. I will say, very standard melodic bass drop. But again, something about the track just feels very fast-paced to me right now. But I don't hate it, to be clear. Right now, as I mentioned, my melodic bass standards are very strict. So to me, this is just like a standard drop. I like it. I enjoy it. I like melodic bass, but nothing kind of really sticks out to me like a wow factor, like wow. A nice progression, I will say, of this track. It kind of moves up and down between the phrases quite well. I have not quite yet scrutinized too hard how similar the first and second verses are, and kind of how symmetrical the track is, at least right now. But it sounds pretty similar to me. I usually when it's obvious that there's some nice progression there, it's obvious. There might be some extra fills and effects, but nothing really sticks out to me. So progression is kind of standard right now. Especially right there, going to the verse into what sounds like the same area, although with probably more vocal harmonies, you don't really get too much new stuff. Nice vocal kind of addition right there that I forgot about. I really like. Into kind of what feels like a slower build-up. This part I definitely recognize was different from the first verse. And that does add kind of a good element to it. A little bit of more of a build-up. There's that progression that I kind of talk about where it's a little bit more asymmetrical. Bigger build-up here. And a little bit of a switch up into that drop. Not too unusual for melodic bass tracks nowadays, so to me it's still pretty standard, but again, I still like the drop. I do like the elements too. I know I mentioned the kick was a little bit kind of less EDM-y and less punchy in the verse, but it does sound like it's a little bit punchier right now, but still not too kind of bass heavy. Good vocals too as well. Coming down to the outro, looking at 3 minute and 39 second track. I like long melodic bass tracks. I think the genre is kind of lends itself nicely to longer tracks. So I do find this not only like to be a short track, but B, the second time listening to it, and even right now, it just feels like it goes by very fast. But more on that in a bit. Good outro. I realized I didn't have the artwork up, so I'll have that now while we do the the actual review. All right, and there you go, Deepest Vales by Last Heroes. Two main things I want to say about this track. Well, three. One small thing, one general thing, and one that kind of ties back to what we talked about earlier. Number one, let's talk about the vocals. This is one of those areas where I get to be vocal, no pun intended, vocal about my opinions on vocals on melodic bass traps, because you can always, not always, but I generally think you can analyze vocals in two ways. Number one is the vocal melody that you're hearing, right? The actual melody and the notes of the vocals, you know, the rhythm and all the things like that. And number two are going to be the actual lyrics. I focus mostly, at least when I'm first kind of getting to know a track, on the rhythm and the melody. Although a lot of times in melodic bass, the emphasis kind of wants to be on the vocals, on the lyrics, and the producer will emphasize the lyrics. Now, I think I talked about in episode number 1 how I'll try not to comment on lyrics because I have such kind of picky standards on how I feel about lyrics. But I will say one thing about melodic bass tracks that I'm just going to critique them for a bit. I think a lot of melodic bass tracks try too hard to be emotional and kind of in their lyrics and be like, hey, let's, tell a story and be super emotional and super specific about these things. And let's really draw attention to these vocals by making everything else really stripped and have the lyrics, really stick out to the listener and things that I don't really like. To me, when a melodic bass track tries too hard for the lyrics to be emotional, I don't like that. I think it kind of takes away from the story. I actually think it takes away from the intention because a lot of times you can tell the lyrics were written to attempt to be emotional, not from an actual intentional standpoint in their, in the songwriting and in the emotion, even though you can argue the intention is to be emotional, but it's empty intention. You're writing it to try to portray emotion. The reason I bring that up today is because this is the first melodic bass track we're reviewing, and that's something I wanted to kind of say straight away with melodic bass tracks is that I don't like when lyrics try too hard to be emotional. I did not think that was the case with this track. I just wanted to say right away, A, I like the melody of the vocals, and B, I don't mind the lyrics. I haven't really scrutinized them, but immediately right away, it didn't stick out to me as a track where the producer tries too hard to be emotional with the lyrics and puts the attention on those empty lyrics. So just since we're talking melodic bass today, I just wanted to make that clarification. I have zero complaints about the vocals in this track. All right, now B, let's talk about my opinion on this track as a whole. Again, you get something pretty standard for melodic bass. I like the drop, pretty standard for melodic bass drop. I like the verses. The verses are a little bit more unique, and again, you get a lot of empty emotion in a lot of melodic bass tracks, so I do think the verses are quite nice in this track. Decent build-up, and decent progression as well, not only in kind of the whole track, but good storytelling and how you achieve that progression. If progression is what you do with the track, storytelling is how you get there. When you introduce certain elements, how you go from phrase to phrase, and things like that. So I do applaud the storytelling and the progression of the track because it gives you something a little bit more, especially with those empty melodic bass tracks. This one doesn't feel that way. I really like how the intro sets the stage for the track, kind of paints you the picture of what the track's going to feel like. And overall, I think it's decent progression. If standard/bad progression is very symmetrical with not much movement, this puts you in kind of what I would consider the bare minimum of progression, where, hey, you got some progression, good. I think tracks should have progression. So just because you have some good progression doesn't mean you're automatically, an amazing track. But I do like that it has progression. So hats off to that. But other than that, standard drop and nice elements and good switch ups in the drop. Standard verses with a standard kind of acoustic section where again the vocals don't seem too empty to me. So overall, I like how the track works together. I like how the elements work together. I like the elements at the end of the day as well. So there are things I like about this track. And again, I like melodic bass. So of course there are going to be things I like about this track. And at the end of the day, I think this leaves me with kind of a standard impression of the track of, hey, you know what? Standard melodic bass track, nice elements, nice drop. I do give it props for the progression, which a lot of empty melodic bass tracks don't have, which would probably knock them below a 5, probably to kind of the 4 range if they're really empty and have no progression. But to me, this is a standard track. I have a strict standard for melodic bass because I've listened to so much of it. So right now, I'm kind of right in the middle of the road with this track. So let's talk about the last thing, which is, okay, if right now I'm in the middle of the road with this track, but don't you think it's kind of unfair that you're reviewing this track individually instead of taking it into consideration the context of the EP? To which I would say you're absolutely right. It is unfair. So let's talk about what might change. because the first time listening to this track, as I mentioned, I listened to it completely immersed. The second time, once I was familiar with the track and got to kind of understand how things work together, I got a little bit more of a picture of not only how the track is as a whole, but B, how it might fit into the context of the EP. Now, it's tough for me with EPs and albums because I'll be completely honest with you guys, I don't really listen to a lot of EPs or albums as a whole together because as I mentioned, I like to make sure I'm fully immersed when I listen to things like that. And I haven't really unfortunately, I haven't cut out any time in my week to think, hey, here is an hour where I'm just going to, lay down and do nothing but listen to an album, right? So I don't really, because I never cut out that time in a week, there are a lot of times where I'll think, hey, this looks like a cool album, I want to check it out, but I just never get to it because I know for me that doesn't just mean listening to it in the car or listening to it at the gym or listening to it while I'm doing some other work like video editing. To me, it means I need to literally sit down or lay down, lights off, and be fully immersed in the album. So I don't really get a lot of time to listen to the things like that. And the reason I'm mentioning that is this, because I'm rating this track individually, but I have not listened to the EP, and if I'm being honest, I don't know if I'm going to have time to get to listen to the EP. I haven't even listened to their last EP, and it's on my to-listen list. Their last EP is literally on my, hey, things to listen to when I can. It's on there, and I have not listened to it yet because, again, unfortunately, I haven't made time for it. All that is to say this. I'm going to be rating this track individually today, but I can see how my rating might change and it happens to be that in the EP, it plays a much more significant role. To me, this track felt like a pretty standard melodic bass track, but the biggest character that kind of stuck out to me was its speed. It felt pretty fast. I love long melodic bass tracks. This is 3 minutes and 39 seconds, and for melodic bass, I would consider that short, and I definitely think you can have a lot more progression and storytelling with longer tracks. But the fact that this is short, the fact that it's pretty standard melodic bass drop, I mean, it has good kind of elements and character to it that you could tell fits in a universe somewhere. And the fact that it feels fast paced kind of makes me wonder if in the context of the EP, it's in the exact right place at the right time to give you something standard with unique character, but also fast paced to maybe switch up whatever you listened to before, whatever you're going to listen to after. And again, it makes me wonder it makes me think that it's possible that in the EP, if done correctly, it would work really, really well. So where does that leave my final rating? Might as well get to it because I could go on and on about the possibilities of how it fits in the EP, but my final rating is ultimately left at this, where we take this track that, again, as someone who has very strict standard for melodic bass and talked about some of the things I like about this track, still a standard track that puts you at a 5 out of 10. Even though it has good progression, I do think progression is the bare minimum to make it, a good average track. So to me, it's at a 5 out of 10 with the caveat that, again, to me, the track, it felt like it had good character. It felt holistic. It felt like, it had something unique going for it. In this case, I'm talking about the speed of the track and how it felt pretty fast to some extent. It just kind of feels that way, almost like Atomos does in my discography. So when you listen to this track and you kind of consider that, hey, it has a certain feel to it, if it fits really well in the EP, this very well could be a 6 out of 10 track. To me, it's a 5 taking individually, but if worked well, if done right, I can see why you might think, hey, in the EP, it works phenomenally in this place, 6 out of 10. I could see that. Does it push 7? I don't know. It would have to be something really, really drastic, A, for the EP, and B, for Last Heroes, which I know it's not for Last Heroes because I like Last Heroes and I listen to them. So it would have to be something really drastic and really impactful and meaningful, and I would argue artistic in the EP to push that 7, which it's possible. But I do think right now I have a 5 out of 10 track with a possible 6 out of 10. Last note I want to make is it kind of feels similar to kind of how Atomos feels in my discography, where Atomos feels very fast. I still think it has good character, but when you listen to it, it feels very fast. It feels like it's rushed, and it feels like it doesn't really do much for what you could do with some nice long-term storytelling. But in the context of my discography and the context of who I am as an artist, Atomos is a very unique, strange, and kind of creative switch up for my style. So that's kind of where my perspective and my perceptions, and to some extent my bias, kicks in when it comes to listening to this track is, hey, it's very fast, and I like longer, slower tracks with more progression, but it's very possible that in the context of the EP, just like how Atomos in the context of my discography makes a difference, it's very possible that in the context of the EP, it's exactly what you need, it's delivered perfectly, and it gives it some unique character and kind of progression to the EP that fits exactly what it needs at that time, which again solidifies my rating at a 5 out of 10 taken individually, with a possible 6 out of 10 if in the context of the EP it really elevates the experience. And that is Deepest Vales by Last Heroes. Again, I know I said I had a lot of things to talk about, and I did have a lot of things to talk about. I do like how I kind of talk about something a little bit different and kind of emphasize, what you might take away in rating things, different in every video. So that is what we talked about today. We talked about taking tracks that are part of larger work individually, and rating a genre that I or you or anyone is very, very familiar with, that you've listened to a lot to, and how that might impact your standards, similar to what I talked about in episode number 2 of this series. But that is pretty much about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Let me know if you guys agree or disagree. I love Last Heroes. I love melodic bass. I do like this track. And I know I mentioned a few things criticizing melodic bass for the lyrics. I have no problems with the lyrics here. So let me know if you guys pick up on that. Let me know if you guys like melodic bass. Let me know if what artists you guys listen to and how you guys kind of consume and enjoy your melodic bass tracks. If you listen to things like lyrics or drops, if you pay more attention to some things more than others. And let me know what you guys think about a lot of the things I said in this video, including those 2 points I mentioned earlier. If you like this track, if you don't like this track, let me know. If you've listened to the EP, definitely let me know, especially if you kind of hold EPs and albums to a standard of being consumed all at once. If you guys do that, definitely let me know if the context of the EP changes how you might perceive this track. Don't forget, Not Me, Us is out on all platforms. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But other than that, that is all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.